Hey, this is Ramon, Channels Alpha 4, and welcome to my Bible study. This is Genesis chapter 37, Joseph. So we're going to be starting with the first real narrative in the Bible. Because of that, these chapters are now a little bit longer. This is Genesis chapter 37, and our format is summary, questions, notes with relevant readings. Okay, so let's begin with the summary. When Joseph was 17, he was a tattletale and a bit of a rat. And his brothers did not like him because of this. At this point in time, the family had become shepherds. Jacob favored Joseph above his other sons, lavishing him with gifts, such as his famous coat. This made the brothers jealous of their youngest brother and resentful of their father. Even Joseph's dreams were of grandeur above the other brothers' ambitions and imaginations. His father, Jacob, even used Joseph as an informant to check up on his other sons. One such case was a mission to spy on them in Hebron, where they were pasturing the family's flock. The brothers had disobeyed their father and moved on to Dothan with the flock without informing him, making Jacob suspicious as to why the sons had been gone for so long. When Joseph caught up to them and found them, the brothers had already come up with a plan to strip him of his coat and drop him in a dry well. After the plan was accomplished, the brothers saw a caravan of Midianite, Ishmaelite merchants traveling from Gilead to Egypt to trade spices. They sold their younger brother for 20 pieces of silver. Reuben was the only brother to oppose any of this, and he tore his clothes in sorrow. The other brothers covered up their shame, their crime, by dipping Joseph's coat in goat's blood, claiming he was eaten by a wild animal. This evidence broke Jacob's heart, and he grieved for years to come. Meanwhile, the Midianite merchants sold Joseph into the service of an Egyptian guard named Potiphar. Here in this chapter, the narrative moves from small, self-contained episodes into a coherent plot. Chapters 37 to 50 of Genesis could be read as its own novella in a modern literary sense. At this point in the Bible, a narrator's voice has developed in the reading of the text. By the start of this chapter, and a distinct narrative style develops in these chapters beyond that of the epic poetry style of the Babylonian, Assyrian, and Canaanite myths. But so too does the theology presented evolve from a direct personified God into a mysterious, ever-present God. As well does the setting shift from Canaan and Mesopotamia to Egypt. For this reason, some scholars and biblical critics think that the Joseph story may be a later insert by a priest loyal to the northern kingdom. The kings of the northern kingdom descended from Jeroboam, a descendant of the tribe named for Joseph's son, Ephraim. And you can read about this in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 26. If this theory holds true, then priestly writers would have composed the Joseph narrative to affirm and reinforce the Jeroboam dynasty's right to rule. All right, now, even though it's been a while, I do have some questions this time. So here are some questions I could not just find through my research. So the first question that I have is, where was the actual Egyptian palace during the time of Joseph? So this would have been around 1600. So where was the Egyptian capital around 1600? Also, I don't know if they would be calling themselves pharaohs in 1600. So in 1600 BC, were they using the term, in 1600 BC, were the Egyptians using the term pharaoh? And where was the capital of the empire at that time. Also, what section of Egypt would Joseph have been traveling into? Were there multiple kingdoms? These are the questions that I have surrounding this story. If there's any legitimacy to it, I'm curious what the actual history would reflect. The other question that I have is, what is the later political importance in Israel or Judea of portraying Reuben as sympathetic in trying to save Joseph's life, as narratively there is no payoff to his rescue attempt? With Joseph, the story, you get the Joakim connection. And with Judah, obviously, that's where you get the term Jews from. So you can see why it's important that Judah is one of the people that tries to save Joseph. But what is the political importance when they were writing the story of making sure to note that Reuben also, was not involved in the attempt to sell Joseph into slavery, but also was actively trying to rescue him? That's an important detail that I can't seem to find anywhere. Now we have the notes and readings. So first off is we have verse number 2 of chapter 37. And this is the story of his family. For those who ascribe to predestinational determinism, they see in the story of Joseph God using both good and evil to bring about his mysterious purposes, a problematic formula for most Christians. Verse number 3. Jacob loved Joseph more than he did any of his other sons, because Joseph was born after Jacob was very old. Jacob had given Joseph a fancy coat. Translations of the item gifted included long sleeve coat, coat of many colors, long ornamented coat, long ornamented robe, and tunic. The coat is a symbol of honor above one's years, like when a boy dresses in a fine 3-piece suit. It shows the father's pride in the child. Verse 4. To show that he was his favorite son, and Joseph's brothers hated him and would not be friendly to him. They would not be friendly to him could also be translated as they would not speak to him, or they would not even say peace to him, or they would not even say hello to him, or they would not even say shalom to him. Then we get to verse number 5. One day Joseph told his brothers what he had dreamed, and they hated him even more. Joseph begins the story with a lack of foresight, wisdom, and maturity. Considering how high he rises in the story, it's interesting how naive he begins. Hey, so you might notice I'm in a different outfit and it's a different time of day, so the lighting's different. My previous video got interrupted and I had to put off filming for about 2 days, so it's a little bit later. But anyway, let's try this again. Verse number 10. When he told his father about his dream, his father became angry and said, "What's that supposed to mean? Are your mother and I and your brothers all going to come and bow down in front of you?" There are many theories as to who the mother being referenced here could be, as Rachel had already died in the current narrative. Conservative Christians see Leah as the stepmother in question, while evangelicals see a reference to Bilhah, while academic source and literary critics see that what they consider an inconsistency and a contradiction points to this story following a different tradition in whose account Rachel was still alive at this point in the narrative, though this hypothesis is very unlikely as there are no sources to prove it. Then we get to verse 12. One day when Joseph's brothers had taken the sheep to pasture near Shechem. From Canaan to Shechem was approximately 50 miles. Then we get to verse 17. They're not here anymore, the man replied. I overheard them say they were going to Dothan. The distance from Shechem to Dothan is roughly 16 miles. Verse 25. As Joseph's brothers sat down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with all kinds of spices that they were taking to Egypt. The trade route from Syria to Egypt crossed near Dothan and was well established by the time this story was being told. The brothers eating as their younger brother is trapped in a well is supposed to demonstrate their cruelty. The mention of a camel here is also a problem, as it is most likely an anachronism, since camels were not common in the Levant, nor domesticated until approximately 930 BC. And this story implies that it is occurring near 1650 BC. That's 1650 BC. The period in actual history when Semitic people were in Egypt in great number. Literalists get around this by labeling camels as luxury items to demonstrate status, wealth, and sophistication, which, though possible, is very improbable. Then we get to verses 26 to 27. So Judah said, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and hide his body? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not harm him. After all, he is our brother." And the others agreed. This passage is a source of anti-Semitic stereotypes for later Christians reading this chapter. Then we get to verse 28. When the Midianite merchants came by, Joseph's brothers took him out of the well, and for 20 pieces of silver they sold him to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. Oh, just to be clear, I'm using the CEV version for this one. The way it reads in this version makes it a little too clear. In most translations, it doesn't say exactly who sold who. So, the Midianite traders and the Ishmaelite merchants are two very different caravans, just as Reuben's and Judah's attempts at sparing Joseph's life are very different, with very different motives and goals. In the same way that we see the patriarchal father referred to as both Israel and Jacob in this chapter, some try to say that this doubling of accounts is just a way of reinforcing the major themes and impact of the chapter. Others say that this doubling represents two sources, the E source for one version of the story and the J source for another version of the story. However, literalists do not automatically assume two sources here. Instead, many commentaries will conflate the Ishmaelites and the Midianites as interchangeable designations, like Texan and American, or Londoner and Englander. However, a much more simple and extremely possible explanation is that the opening of this verse was an insertion by a later scribe, and possibly the Midianites were not part of the original and long-lost version of this story. In more word-for-word translations of this verse, the they that sold and retrieved Joseph from the well or cistern is very unclear and remains mysterious in the original language. If it is the brothers, as many translations like this one, the CEV, like to imply, then the cruelty of the brothers knows no bounds and paints the early Israelites in a negative light, as early Christians would read it. If, on the other hand, it was one of the caravans who recovered Joseph and then sold him to the other caravan, then the brothers lost track of their brother before their hearts could be changed and moved in order to fulfill God's plan, as modern Calvinists might read it. Orthodox Catholics see something different here. They see a prefiguration of Christ in the story, making it more important as being inspired than historical. As Christ also was betrayed by his brothers, his fellow Jews, and specifically Judas, and denied by Peter. How Christ was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, and he too was thrown into a kind of pit. Here a well, there a catacomb or a tomb, before rising again and becoming Lord. Also, pit and hell sometimes are words that are synonyms for each other. Then we get to verse 29. When Reuben returned to the well and did not find Joseph there, he tore his clothes in sorrow. The tearing of garments and the wearing of ashes is the traditional way of showing that you are in mourning in the ancient Middle East. Then we get to verse 31. Joseph's brothers killed a goat and dipped Joseph's fancy coat in its blood. Taken in context with Jacob's story and his treatment of his own father and brother, there is a type of poetic irony in his being deceived here, and his just accepting the brother's claims, that is his son's claims, that his prized son has been lost. Then the final verse relevant to my notes is going to be verse 32 for this study session. After this, they took the coat to their father and said, "We found this. Look at it carefully and see if it belongs to your son." In contrast to chapter 27, Jacob is now deceived by an article of clothing, as he had once deceived his own father. Now, real quickly, just to remind you guys that I am doing research with the Jewish Study Bible, the Orthodox Study Bible, the ESV Study Bible, and the CSB Study Bible, as well as the Midrash. And the new Oxford Anointed Study Bible, and also the Midrash, the Talmud. For this one, I did not use any of the Gnostic texts, but I also do frequently reference history books and other Mesopotamian and Egyptian and whatever cultures being referenced, myths. As we get into Joseph, there might be some opportunity for me to use some more Egyptian sources, which I'm hoping will come. If not, that's what it is. C'est la vie. But thank you for listening to this. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you all next time and later. Oh, peace. Comment down below, people. Put some comments on here. I want to have a discussion, so start commenting, please. Talk to you later. Bye.